Hi, my name is Mark Hemsworth, and I've been interested in Formula 1 since I was 4 years old. But it wasn't until 1996 I got my big break to join a Formula 1 team. Since then, I've been race and test team coordinator and test team manager. In my testing role, I've got to work with some great drivers: Damon Hill, Mika Salo, Jos Verstappen, and Pedro de la Rosa. I also work very closely with the race and test engineers and the data engineers who are working on the car setups. It's only through achieving a good car setup that we can improve on-track performance. People often ask me, why do you work in Formula 1? It's such a stressful environment and you work massively long hours. Well, my answer to them is simple. When you see your car lined up on the grid for the first race of a fresh season, all that stress just melts away. And if you can come out of that race with the points or podium finish, well, that's just an added bonus. You've probably never had the opportunity to look inside a Formula 1 car before, so let's take a quick tour around the car and look at the various areas where you can make adjustments. This is the front wing, and here is the adjustable flap. Increasing the angle reduces high-speed understeer. Decreasing the angle reduces high-speed oversteer and reduces drag. In general, use as much flap angle as possible without affecting the rear downforce. With the rear wing, you'll set the downforce level on the car. With the smallest wing angles, you get the highest top speeds, and the least drag, and the least downforce. By increasing the wing angle, you'll get more downforce, but your top speed will suffer. In general, use as much rear wing angle as possible and balance it with the front flap. Underneath this cover, we have the front suspension. Here are the springs, dampers, bump rubbers, and packers. And here are the potentiometers for the front suspension movement measurement. Underneath the small cover, we have the front anti-roll bar. Springs are the primary means of supporting the weight of the car. A heavier spring promotes understeer, but allows us to set a lower front ride height, which reduces understeer. A lighter front spring reduces understeer, but means that we have to have a higher ride height. In general, use the heaviest possible front spring to achieve a low ride height. Dampers absorb energy from riding over bumps in the road surface. By increasing the stiffness, you will get better turn-in, but you will get very poor response over the bumps and curbs. By softening the front damper, you will get better front-end grip. In general, use as soft as possible for best front-end grip. Roll bars control the weight transfer from side to side when the car is cornering. A heavier roll bar promotes understeer, but improves turn-in and makes the car what's called pointy. A lighter roll bar reduces understeer. In general, use as stiff an anti-roll bar as possible for good turn-in and balance out the understeer effect. Removing the engine cover, we have the rear dampers, rear springs, rear anti-roll bars, and the potentiometers for the rear suspension movement measurement. This is the rear damper. Increasing the stiffness, the traction will reduce, but gives you very good high-speed corner stability. Softening the damper will give you better traction, but very poor high-speed stability. In general, use as hard as possible for good high-speed stability. Here's the rear spring. A heavier rear spring promotes oversteer, or less understeer, but reduces traction. A lighter rear spring reduces oversteer, but promotes understeer, with the trade-off of better traction. In general, use the softest springs for best traction. Here's the rear anti-roll bar. A heavier roll bar reduces understeer and promotes oversteer, but does reduce traction. A lighter roll bar increases understeer, but will improve traction. In general, use as soft a roll bar as possible to improve traction. Okay, now you've had a good look round a Formula 1 car. I hope this allows you to visualise. Car setup is the most important aspect within Formula 1 and will directly affect your on-track performance. Each individual circuit has its own set of characteristics that you'll need to think about when coming up with a car setup. As well as that, there are weather conditions that need to be taken into account. Wet weather, dry weather, and you need to have setup changes to allow for both conditions. Within car setup, there are two distinct areas. There's the aero, which can be altered using the front and the rear wings, and there is the mechanical grip that can be altered using the dampers, the roll bars, and adjusting the ride height. Please remember though, when making changes to car setup, make one change at a time and quantify that change, be it a gain or a loss, before moving on to the next change. If you make too many changes, you can very easily get lost in car setup. Qualifying determines your grid position for Sunday's race. It's absolutely vital you go into this session with the best setup possible. Use the practice sessions before qualifying to adjust your setup to achieve your maximum performance. In qualifying, run your car as light as possible. That means put in the least amount of fuel for the number of laps you intend to complete during an individual run. Also fit new tyres. These will give you the best grip and allow you to maximise your performance. The higher your grid position, the higher the likelihood of you scoring points within the race. For slow speed circuits such as Hungary or Monaco, we need to run maximum downforce on the car. You will need to increase the front and rear wing angle to their maximum extent. To improve traction out of slow speed corners, why not try softening the springs on the rear end? To set the gears, find the fastest part of the circuit, and you should be just hitting the rev limiter at this point. Having set this, evenly spread all the other gear ratios to give you good even acceleration out of a slow speed corner. For high speed circuits such as Hockenheim, we need to get maximum straight line speed from the car, and this can only be achieved by reducing the drag to a minimum. This is done by lowering the front and rear wing. However, this may promote understeer, and to control that, you may want to lower the ride height of the car, but be careful, don't go too low as your plank may be illegal at the end of the race. Now for the gear ratios. Set the gears to hit the rev limiter at the end of the fastest straight. Having set this point, then evenly space all the other ratios to give you a nice smooth power delivery. How do you change a dry setup to a wet setup on the car? Obviously in the wet there's less grip. To counter this, you need to increase the downforce on the front and rear wing elements. You can achieve this by increasing the angle of both of those elements. In addition, you can soften the springs. Softening the springs improves the traction, but there is a danger. Soften too much and you will lower your ride height, and in monsoon conditions you may aquaplane off the circuit. There are 4 types of tyre available to you: dry tyre, intermediate, wet, and the monsoon tyre. On dry tarmac, use the dry tyre because it has the best grip and the biggest contact patch with the tarmac. If there's a little bit of water on the tarmac, use the intermediate tyre. It has cuts in it to disperse some of the water away, but it will still last on a drying surface. Be careful on a drying circuit that you don't overheat them, so use the wet line on straights. In normal wet conditions, the wet tyres offer the best compromise between grip and water dispersal. The monsoon tyres are designed for very heavy wet conditions. These tyres will disperse a lot of water, but they're too soft to be run on a dry or drying surface. Okay, it's Sunday afternoon. Your car's sat on the grid. You can see what the weather is like at the moment, but you've been handed a weather forecast that says the weather may change. Do you go dry setup or wet setup? And what tyres do you fit? Well, if you're at the front end of the grid, you'll probably opt for a low-risk strategy. That means going for a tyre and a setup with the conditions as they are at that moment in time. However, if you're at the back of the grid or a little bit further forward, you may opt for a high-risk strategy. The high risk is putting tyres and setup for something that may happen in the future, according to that weather forecast. And who knows, this may pay dividends. There's points to be scored and possibly a podium.